All right. So today we're starting a new sermon series called Parables. Okay? And so parables, small stories, big truths, and we're talking about these parables that Jesus taught. We're not going to go through all of them. If you read through the New Testament, there's about 46 parables that Jesus taught, and we're probably going to do maybe 10 or so of these. But parables are pretty important for us because if you know what a parable is, it's exactly what that tagline says right there. It's a small story that has a big truth. Okay, so it's something, a way of communicating a thought, an idea, a principle in a story that you can understand. And so Jesus would teach these stories as he was out and about. And he would teach these stories to show a kingdom truth, to show a kingdom principle, how it really is spiritually, in ways that people could understand. And so the thing is, there's images that are in some of these stories that they made sense to the people in that day, in that time, in that culture, but some of these are a little bit weird to us. Okay, I don't know if any of you have read some parables where you're like, okay, I get it because I've been taught what it means, but I don't actually, I can't picture it. I don't actually know what that means because that doesn't really apply to us here. So as we go through these, and really part of my plan is to kind of to explain the story so that you can understand it, but the ultimate goal is the same as what Jesus's was, that you understand the truth that the story is trying to teach. Okay, so if you leave here and you don't understand the story and you understand the truth, that's a win. If you understand both, then that's a blessing, all right? So we'll take that. But we need to understand the truth that Jesus is trying to relay. So this morning we're going to look at the parable of the wise and foolish builder. How many of you in here would declare that you were a foolish builder? A couple, okay. There's some offering of I'm a foolish builder, okay? So hopefully you'll see some truth in this today. How many of you think that you're a wise builder? Well, there was more people willing to admit they were foolish than to admit they were wise. That means there's a lot of people that are like, I am totally playing it safe. Right? I am not going to be on this end. And wait a minute. So what we're all afraid of is being a fool. Okay, when it comes down to it, right? I don't want to be the fool that says I'm foolish. I don't want to be the fool that says I'm wise and I get tricked and get duped. But this is at the end of Matthew chapter 7. And if you've ever heard of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, okay, he taught all this amazing stuff, all these different things. And that started back in chapter 5. So 3 chapters long, 5, 6, and 7. And he kind of wraps up this Sermon on the Mount with this parable, with this story, which to me makes this parable a pretty big deal. That Jesus has all these phenomenal teachings that we refer back to and we learn from, and then he wraps them up with this parable. So if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 7, or it'll be up here on the screen as well. He says in verse 24, "Therefore whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." So we see this parable, and for us, it may make sense kind of, but there's some things that you need to know. There's some imagery that you probably don't have to really bring this parable to life. There's some specific meaning that really is relevant to that culture. So I got a few pictures today to help you out. But in the Middle East, there are these things called wadis. Say wadi. Wadi. Okay, it's W-A-D-I. So a wadi is a dry riverbed that it's dry riverbed, but during the rainy season, it gets filled with water. Okay? And this is in the valley-like area of the desert, but most of the year, most of the time, it's completely dry or maybe has kind of a puddle, that hasn't quite evaporated yet. So this is kind of like a wadi. So if you picture yourself standing down there, you can see kind of at the bottom, there's a little bit of moisture. That's what a wadi looks like. Now what happens is miles away, like literally 10, 15 miles away, up in those mountains, it'll start to rain. And what do you think happens to that water? It begins to work its way down. Okay, it starts to pool up in the mountains, it works its way down. At some point, the mountains can only handle so much of it, and based on this picture, where do you think that water is going to go? It's coming down into that wadi. So it comes gushing down in these canyons, okay? It comes gushing down, and so what would happen is they would be in a place where it does not rain. It does not rain typically right there at the base of that mountain, in that wadi. If you're standing there, if you're hanging out, it doesn't rain right there. So you think you're pretty safe. How many of you guys like to check the forecast before you go and do something? I like to just wing it and just whatever happens. I'm that kind of guy, because you know what? I mean, let's be honest. How often does the forecast say 50%? I mean, and if it says 60%, I mean, is there really a difference? 60% chance of rain, it's a little bit more than it might rain. I just go with it. I just figure it out. But so I would go to a place like that and be like, forecast is irrelevant to me, because I'm just going to experience whatever. But some of you would look and say, it's a perfect day to go visit the wadi. Here we are in the Middle East, and it's like, what are we going to do today? Like, hey honey, we're going to check out the wadi. The forecast is clear. No rain anywhere in sight. Now, think about this, 10 to 15 miles away. Like, you forgot to check the weather in Bluff City and in Vandalia and see what might be happening over there. So you would come to this place, it's a clear sky, little do you know it's raining 10 to 15 miles away, and you might hear a sound in the distance. Now, how many of you know how that works when you hear a sound in the distance? It takes a while before it gets to where you're at sometimes. When you hear it, it's probably already happened, okay? You hear a big bang, a big boom that's far off in the distance, miles down the road. By the time it gets to you, it's like it's been minutes, and you're like, oh, that's weird. What is that? And you're looking around. So this noise goes off in the distance, and literally in a matter of seconds, water can come pouring down that mountain and just gushing through there, filling that. And I want to tell you that when it comes rushing through there, it's powerful. It is dangerous. People literally die trying to climb. This is kind of what it looks like, okay? This is a picture of that wadi just breaking loose, that water just flooding down there. And people, they say that more people got killed in the desert floods through the days of the Bible than any other cause combined. That includes heat, dying of thirst, scorpion bites, whatever you want to picture. People would die from in the Middle East. More people died from wadi flooding than from all those other things combined. Psalm 126, verse 4 says, "Restore our fortunes, Lord, like streams in the Negev." The Negev is a desert out there, and the word streams here, what's important about this is when you look at the root word and how it's translated, it actually means flooded streams. And so the idea here is, the imagery when this psalm was written was, they're picturing a wadi. They're picturing this stream coming down and in the desert. And the idea here is that, God, I'm in trouble, right? God, I'm not doing too well. I'd like you to restore my fortunes suddenly with great power, like a flood in the desert. Think about that. This is the kind of imagery that they understood, because they experienced that wadi and they experienced that water breaking loose. And it's like, man, God, would you restore my fortunes powerfully and quickly like you do those streams in the desert? They had the understanding of this. A little further in Psalm 124, it says that if the Lord had not been on our side, the flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Again, it's another picture of the wadi. If you put that second picture up there, You see this man standing down there. This is the same one from earlier. And he's standing down there, and you see that little bit of water, so it's flooded at some point. But if you look everywhere else, it's pretty dry, okay? So that's a little bit of standing water. But you picture the psalmist as he writes this, that he's standing down there in that wadi, and he hears the sound. And he knows, I've got to get out. This is dangerous. This can get really bad, really fast. And he says, this is what it would have been like if God had not been on my side. That this tragedy would come upon me all of a sudden. Quick, overcoming power. But God is on his side. So this water would come down the mountains, and there's times where it may be 20 to 30 feet deep. Now it doesn't last long. Okay? It doesn't last long at all. It just flows right out toward the sea. But it brings down all this dirt and all this soot and really kind of a sandy material. You think about what's up in the rocks, okay, up in the mountains. It's being washed down. So the reason I share all this is the kind of stuff that they picture when they hear a parable about building on the sand. I mean, it's not a parable about building in Pensacola on the beach. This is a parable about building in a wadi on the sand. Okay? And so when they see this, they understand what this means. And there's the second picture of the flood. So you can see the impact even as it hits the bottom. Imagine if that man is standing right down there and you look at that impact that's coming. They had an understanding, a fullness of this kind of imagery. And so when he says you can build on the rock or you can build on the sand, it makes sense to them. It makes sense because one of these things is wise. One of these things can actually save your life, building on the rock. And the other one is foolish, and it can actually cost you your life, building on the sand. And so knowing all that, he says, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to the wise man who built his house on the rock. Look at what happens. The rain descends. The flood comes. The wind blows. It beats on the house, yet it doesn't fall. Why? Because it's founded on the rock. But everyone that hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man that built his house on the sand. The rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew, beat on the house, and it fell, and it was a great fall. Say a great fall.
A great fall.
This is a big deal. Okay, there's two builders, there's two houses. And what you've got to know is that these houses were built in the same area. Okay, their houses are built in the same area, and there's nothing in the text that would even suggest that they were built differently. Right? It could have been the exact same prefab house, or it could have been, the exact same stick-built house, whatever it was the same house. One was not made of brick, one was not made of straw. This is not the Three Little Pigs or whatever. Like the construction of the house, from all we know, is exactly the same, identical. And we see that these builders both heard the teachings. They both heard the teachings. This means they were not ignorant. They had the information that they needed. It means they knew the building code, right? They knew what the code is for this area for a house to be able to stand. There are things that you've got to do in certain ways. Do you know that you got to build a house different in the Gulf than what you do up here in the Midwest? Right? You have to do things differently. Why? Because they know if you do this, it will stand. If you don't, it will not. And so if you try to build a house the way you build one here in Illinois, and you go down to the Gulf Coast and you try to build a house there and a big storm comes, it doesn't even have to be a hurricane. It could just be a tropical storm and it may wipe your house out. So these guys know how to build. They know what was required of them. They knew what would help them withstand the storms. And here's the other similarity. They both faced the storm. Right? One didn't have storm repellent. They both faced the same storm. But there were two differences. Right? They were built on different foundations. And because they were built on different foundations, they both had different ends. One stood in the storm, one collapsed in the storm. And of course, this building a house is just an analogy for your life, right? For the life that each person builds. And so as we sit here this morning, right, we've got a lot of nice houses in here. You guys look great. You guys look very well put together. Nobody's even sleeping right now, so I'm rocking it, right? I mean, that's why we literally took the rocker out of the back, because we were tired of people falling asleep in it. But you guys are doing good. You look good. And I got to believe that as we look around this place, right, we see people that look great, we see people that talk great, we see people that probably know the things that we should say, right? And some of you guys talk different in here than what you talk out there, if we're being honest, okay? Because we know. You got to look the part of a Christian. So you're a nice house. Turn to somebody next to you and say, you're a nice house. Now, men, don't you ever say that to a woman again. That's it. Like, that's the only time you can ever do that for the rest of your life. Because the next time you're gonna find out who can stand the storm, right? Call your woman a house one more time. See what happens today. All right. So, but what we can tell from the outward appearance is that we all look like pretty nice houses today. We all look like we're doing pretty good. Like life is doing well. But what if we were to sit down and we were to have a conversation, we were to talk? What if we got to see a little bit about what's on the inside? I think if we're all being honest, we probably would say it's a little bit messy. Right? It's a little bit messy in my house. And some of you guys are like, it's a disaster. There's no way you're coming in. Right? You need to call first. I got to deal with some things. But if we're being honest, we're all a little bit messy. We all got some upkeep that needs done inside the house. We got some things that we maybe don't necessarily want to show everyone else, but it can be cleaned up. Do you know that? The messiness that is within us, it can be cleaned up. All right, so don't worry too much about that. If you're in Christ, you're in that process of it being cleaned up. But what about if we went a little bit further and we began to, as we ask questions to one another, we're inspecting each other's foundation? Just think about that for just a moment. We're going to inspect our foundations. What are you built on? You, your ideas, your mindset, the way you are, the way you act, the things you say, the life you live, what is it built on? What is the foundation of it? What is it all sitting on? Because I'm going to tell you, if the foundation is bad, it's only a matter of time before the cracks start to show. And if the foundation is bad, it's only a matter of time before the cracks start to show inside the house. And again, this is part that we're probably not letting too many people see, but there's a matter of time where the foundation's bad and the cracks are on the inside. There's only a matter of time before it's going to start to show on the outside. It's just the way that it works. If you know anything about homes, that's how it works. And so then you see a house that is weakened. You see a house that is not quite as strong as what it ought to be. And then what happens when the storm comes? Because the storm will come. Right? On the house on the rock, the house on the sand, the storm came. Either way, it's gonna come. And I don't know where people get this idea that if you become a Christian, that there's no more storms. I know where they get that idea. It's the lie of the enemy. Right? It's the lie of the enemy, because if you get tricked into thinking that once I become a believer, I don't have to deal with any of this junk anymore, then you begin to deal with the junk, then what do? You question who? God. Okay, so it's a lie of the enemy. We're all going to still deal with the storms. We're all still on this life. You're still all dealing with all these other nice, beautiful houses that you see around you that sometimes are the bringers of the storm. Okay? The ones in your home sometimes are the bringers of the storm. The ones that you work with sometimes bring the storm. But life doesn't just get easy. Okay? Again, both builders face the storm. Look what it says. It says, the rain descended. The floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house. This isn't like just a light shower. This is like the mountain overflowing into the wadi. And when you look at this, they were hit from all sides. This can assure you that in your life, you will be hit from every side. right? The rains come down, stuff comes from the top. The floods rise up, stuff comes from the bottom. The wind whips around, stuff comes from every side of you. Some way, somehow, these things will happen. And here's what they do when they all come together is they beat on that house. All right, now when they beat on that house, it's going to be pretty important what your foundation is, whether you continue to stand or whether you do not. Has anyone here been beat on by the storms of life a time or two? Amen. Some of you probably more than what you would like to recall. It's sure to happen. It's a guarantee. And the thing is, with these storms in life, there are times where you can hear them coming. There's times where you can see them. It's in the forecast. You're just waiting. You're like, oh, Lord, help me. I know it's coming. There's other times where it's just, bam, it sneaks up on you. It's like that wadi when you hear the boom in the distance, and it's 15 miles away, but the boom was 15 miles away, but that was also 15 minutes ago. And so now here comes the storm. Bam, immediate notice. Storm's here. What are you going to do? You can't run fast enough. Any of you ever tried to outrun the storm? At least a couple of us tried to outrun the storm. You can't run fast enough. Imagine yourself being in that wadi that we showed earlier, and the way that storm came flowing through there. Like, nobody can run faster than moving water. It's terrifying, okay? When you think about that imagery, think about it coming. So if you can't outrun it, then what? You better hope you have the foundation to withstand the storm. You better hope you have the foundation, or it will take you down. It will take you under. It's not about the covering of the house, right? Remember we told everybody they look nice. They're a nice house, but it's not about the covering of the house. It's not about whether it's made of brick or made of vinyl on the outside. It's not about whether you have regular shingles or you have metal roofing. It's not about whether you have storm doors on or not. There's a major storm that will come. It's powerful. And I'm going to tell you, it feels like sometimes the winds can just cut right through your house. You ever notice where you can feel the house move? Even on a good, solid, sturdy house. There's been times out here, it's so windy out here, where we've been in there and we can feel the house. It's like, I'm so thankful that it was built on a good foundation. When that wind comes, it feels like it can tear right through. It comes down to, what are you built on? What are you built on? And so there's a few things. Again, if you read back through the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus lays out a lot of different principles here, but I just got a few things that I see people's lives built on, and at one point my life was built on some of this stuff. Sometimes people's lives are built on their finances. Anybody ever experienced a financial storm? It's a pretty scary one. If your whole foundation is your finances, if your life is built on your finances, there's something that you need to know. Every single person in this room could lose their job tomorrow. Maybe you don't have a job, maybe you're on Social Security, they could quit sending out checks tomorrow. Right? If that's what you're built on, my financial stability, my financial situation, if that's what you're built on, and a storm comes and takes that out, you're going to be crushed. You're going to be done for. There's an emergency that could happen at any moment that could take everything that you've got, take every penny to get out from under it, and then where are you at if you're completely dependent on those finances? Matthew 6:24 says, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. It doesn't mean you can't have both God and money. It just means only one of those can be your foundation. It means only one of those can be your life, can be your rock, can be the thing that you turn to when things get tough. Some people's lives are built on their physical ability, what they can do. They can do all the things they want because there's nothing that is holding them back. There's nothing physically that hinders them. But where would you be if a major sickness or disease came upon you? That's a pretty big storm. Nowadays, in the day of cancer, it seems like every other person you know, probably everybody you know, knows somebody personally who has dealt with cancer, right? So it's only a matter of time before somebody in your life is affected by this, but what if it's you? And your foundation is, I am a physically well-bodied person and I can do anything. If I want to do something, I can do it because I'm just that good, right? I'm physically fit, I'm in good shape, I love to do things. And if that's our foundation, what happens when the storm comes? Others are built on relationships. And, you know, I've probably shared this too many times, but there's been points in our lives where me and Kristen try to be very mindful of being in the present, in the here and now with our kids. We love our kids. We're so happy to have them. Marissa's still at home. But you know there's going to be a day where they leave. I mean, I hope so. I love having them now. I want them to leave sometime. Okay? But if everything I have is my kids, and they for some reason decide to move to, Texas and Rhode Island or something, is my life going to be shattered? Is it going to be over? Am I going to be crushed? Right? There's times where our spouse is our life. There's times where one of our parents is our life, or one of our friends is our life, and God forbid something would happen to one of them, where would we be? Are they our foundation? Are they all we're living for? Because if they are, I hate to tell you, but most everybody's going to die sometime, unless the Lord comes back in our life, which, there's many that believe that He will. I'm hopeful that He will. But the thing is that relationships kind of go through ups and downs. What if just a relationship is damaged or broken? What if there's just something that happens, a misunderstanding, and that damage comes into the picture? If this is your foundation, if this is all you're living for, and that storm comes, you're going to crumble. You're going to have a hard time. So what is your foundation? And if you haven't put it all together yet, we're talking about Christ, about Jesus Christ being the rock, and that there is no other foundation worth building on. 1 Corinthians 3:11 tells us, "For no other foundation can anyone lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ." As the disciples are teaching this and they're talking about this, they're saying, listen, everything else that hopes and dreams are built on, everything else that people run to, that they tie their life to, that they're willing to stake their lives on, there's no other one that is eternal. There's no other one that lasts. There's no other one that will withstand every storm. It's only in Christ Jesus. Psalm 11, or 118, verse 22, tells us the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Speaking of Jesus, they missed it, right? Don't be a builder that misses the fact that Jesus is the chief cornerstone, right? Don't be the builder that misses the fact that it doesn't matter what you build, it doesn't matter what it looks like. If Christ is not the foundation, it won't stand. It will crumble. It's only a matter of time. Jesus said, anyone who listens to my teaching and he follows it, he's wise. He says, but anybody that listens to it and doesn't follow it, doesn't do it, is foolish. Notice he doesn't say that they're smart and that they're stupid. He says they're wise or they're foolish. Because listen, there's a lot of nice looking people in here, there's probably a lot of really smart people in this room today. But do you know that you can be an intelligent fool?
Yes.
I mean, you can be an intelligent fool. I've been an intelligent fool the first 2/3 of my life. You can be an informed fool, right? Because even these two men, they both had the knowledge, they both had the plan, they both knew what they were supposed to do, except one was still a fool. So you can be smart and be a fool, you can be informed and be a fool. James 1:22 tells us, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. See, Jesus says you got to hear it, but then you got to do it. You got to hear it, and then you got to have some kind of response that comes out of this. Have you heard the words of Jesus? Because if you've heard the words of Jesus and you're not putting them to practice in your life, according to James, you deceive yourself. You deceive yourself. What does that mean? It means you probably think that you have a pretty good, solid life. You probably think that, you know what, I'm doing pretty well. I've made it through some difficult things. You know, you can make it through some difficult things without Jesus. Been there and done that. But it's just a matter of time. So you can be deceived into thinking, I'm doing well. Right? I was there. I was successful as a person in finances, in things I had, and happily married, had kids. I've been in that place where I did all that and thought I was doing well without Jesus until there was a point where the storm was too much and I realized this foundation's not good enough. It's not going to last for me. Verse 23 in James, he says, "For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, but then he goes away and he immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work. And this one will be blessed in what he does." So hear what Jesus has to say. And then when you've heard it, you've got to put it into practice. Not only does that give you a good foundation for your life, but James tells us that you'll be blessed. I mean, how many of you do not want to be blessed? Right? You want that blessing on top of it, but it's like you need the good foundation first. But here's the thing, is people either don't believe this, or sometimes they don't really believe that the blessing will be worth the effort. Sometimes people don't believe it, sometimes they don't believe the blessing will be worth the effort. Can I tell you that it takes more work to build a house on a proper foundation? Do you know that costs more, right? It's more expensive. Do you know that it's also worth it in the long run?
Yes.
I mean, if you go build a house right now, you could probably find somebody that's a little bit shady that does construction that they're like, oh sure, dude, I will build that for you, just laying the floor joists right on the gravel. Yeah, we'll be good. Yeah, it'll be totally fine. We'll make it nice and I'll double up, it'll be great. We'll save you, $10,000. Run. Okay? You can do things that are shortcuts that, again, the end of the finished product, it might look amazing. But it's worth the extra investment to have a solid foundation on your house. And it's worth the extra investment to have a solid foundation in your life. It's easy to build a house, to build a life that is built on finances. It's easy to build a life that is built on relationships or on our good health. But it's a fragile life. We can all do that. Every single person here, you can build a life on all kinds of worldly things, but I want to tell you, it's a fragile life. It's a fragile life. And I suspect that there's many in this room who've had the appearance of a life that's founded on the rock. If we look at you, we turn to one another and we say, nice house. It does look like that. But if you're being honest, you've not both heard and done. See, we've all heard. But have we heard and done? Have we heard and followed through? Maybe you know the salvation message. You know what Christ has done. You know about what he did at the cross. You know about that finished work, but you've never really stepped out and took hold of it. I want to tell you that it's hard to change the foundation on a house, but it can be done. Right? They can lift the house right up and they can build a foundation. They can put it back down. It's hard and it's expensive. It can be done. But can I tell you that Jesus can change the foundation of your life in an instant, in a moment? And you know what? It's also very expensive, except that he already paid the bill. You don't owe anything. He says, come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. With one step of obedience on our part, he can totally change our foundation. Will you stand with me this morning? If you would bow your heads and close your eyes, I just want to run you through a couple of things this morning. And some of you are right here. You're right there. You know this. You know the story. And you're a hearer. But today you need to step out and be a doer. You need to say, Lord, I answer the call today. Will you take that step today? Will today be the day that you say, you know what, I'm tired of living this fragile life. I'm tired of living this life that it feels like every storm that comes along, man, I just barely make it through. Just barely, and I'm so afraid that there's going to be one day, one thing's going to happen, and it's going to be more than what my life can bear. It's going to take me under. You feel the rain coming from the top, you feel the floods coming up, and you think, man, if that wind starts coming side to side, there's no way that this fragile house is going to be able to take it one more time. Listen, I want to tell you that no one builds with the expectation that the structure will fail. It's not your fault. It's okay. But as the storms come, you'll find that it's only a matter of time before it falls. And I want to urge you, beg you today, don't let that be you. In a moment, we're going to open up the altars, and if that's you, I want you to come. I want you to talk with somebody. I want you to pray. Jesus said the house built on the sand fell. But he also said, and great was its fall. There's a reason why I had you repeat that earlier. Great was its fall, because this is speaking of more than just having a bad day or a bad week or a bad life. This is talking about there's going to be one day. It's going to be a judgment day. And on that day, Jesus will separate. He will make distinction between those that were built on the rock and those that were built on the sand. Be sure today that your life is built on Jesus. Be sure today that you've taken those steps, that you've given your life to him. That on that day, he'll be able to say to you, well done, good and faithful servant, come to the right, come with the sheep. I want to tell you that the evidence of salvation is not weeping, praying, stating some kind of motto or creed or anything like that. It's a life changed by the power of the Holy Spirit. And that's why we're doers of the word. It's because once he's in us, man, we can't just hear it and just go home numb to it and continue to be the same. But it's like we hear it and we're urged and we have this desire and this passion, this want to actually do it. That's all available for you today. For the rest of you, maybe you've made that decision already. Maybe you've got a good foundation. Praise the Lord. I mean that in all sincerity. Praise God if you have that good foundation that is Jesus Christ. But sometimes many of us need to return to the basics. We need to take a couple of steps back and we need to look back to what is it? What are the things that Christ has commanded me to do? What are the things that he expects of me, that he desires of me? And I know that he's a good foundation, but I need to refresh my mind with what he wants from me. The person who hears and does Because these are the people who are wise, the one who hear and do. Are you reading the Word? Are you praying? And when you're praying, that's talking and listening. And then doing. Because I want to tell you the results are a great blessing. A life of purpose, a life of peace. And even though the storms come and they beat on that house that's founded on the rock, you need to hear this morning. It will not fall. It will not fall. If you're founded on the rock, there is no storm that can triumph against you. There is no thing. I mean, listen, it's still going to rain. It's still going to flood. The wind's still going to blow. It's still going to beat on that house. But that house will not fall. That house will not fail. Because He is more than enough. Because Jesus has overcome. And because He's with you. So this morning as we open up the altars, I want to invite you down. If you have any prayer needs whatsoever, it doesn't just have to be for salvation. It doesn't just have to be because you're going through a storm, but whatever it is, we want to open up these altars this morning and just invite you to come forward. And as you do, we'll pray for you. We'll believe in faith that the Spirit of the living God is in this place. He's able, He's willing, and He's waiting for you. Won't you come?